Born between 1155 and 1162, Genghis Khan, Emperor of the Mongols, is one of the most brutal murderers that ever drew breath. He killed more than 40 million people during his blood-drenched reign. Genghis Khan changed the religion and culture and genetic structure of tens of millions of people that he conquered and impregnated. Today, you are going to understand how ruthless this evil emperor had to be in order to conquer the world. Trigger alert, this story's not for the squeamish. Genghis Khan is the eldest child of a Mongol chieftain, but his father died and his people abandoned him in the Mongol steppe that stretches across East Asia and northeast China. He gathered his tribes together, created alliances with two other tribal chiefs, Jamakua and Togrul, defeated them in battle, and became Genghis Khan, leader of all the Mongol tribes. He conquered the northern half of China in 1214, toppled the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia, and penetrated the Kingdom of Georgia in the Caucasus Mountains, creating the largest land empire that ever existed. In order to create the largest empire that ever existed, entire populations had to bend the knee. Those that refused paid with their lives. Their cities and settlements were razed to the ground, leaving no one alive. During the 13th and 14th centuries, the mighty Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific shores of the Korean Peninsula across to the cold forests of Eastern Europe in a long river of blood and pain. Mongolian soldiers were always on the move with hundreds of thousands of animals trailing behind them, including horses, cattle and oxen, and of course their wives and children. In the early 1200s, there were over 100,000 soldiers under Khan's command. Like a zombie apocalypse, the Mongol hordes devoured rats, dogs, marmots, hamsters, any living being that crossed their path. The main part of their diet was horse milk and horse blood. Legend tells us that the energy of the horses made them invincible. But food wasn't easy to get hold of as they swept through the desert, especially with so many mouths to feed, so they resorted to eating anything they could find. During shortages, they ate their own soldiers or the fresh dead bodies that they found on the streets. Roadkill became their number one delicacy. Like I said before, Genghis Khan's enemies were ordered to surrender. If they refused, they were annihilated. The city of Otra in Central Asia resisted the Great Khan in 1219. So what did the emperor do? Unfortunately for them, Genghis Khan wasn't feeling that forgiving. He had sent 500 men to the region hoping to create trading routes, but Otra didn't comply. Instead, they massacred an entire caravan of 500 men. Clearly, they had no idea how this story is going to end. Peace was never an option for the Mongol emperor. Khan retaliated by sending an even bigger army and killing off the entire population. He killed the leader, Inalchuk, by pouring molten silver into his orifices so he could learn, a little too late, that greed is not good. The city of Otra guarded the heartland of the Khwarezmian Empire. The Mongols then isolated and captured the legendary cities of Bukhara, Samarkand, and Garanj in turn, as the empire stretched further and further westwards. Genghis Khan had 7 Mongolian wives and 500 concubines that he himself chose from his conquered territories. He clearly consummated these relationships. It is estimated that 20 million men have his DNA. In other words, he is the ancestor of 1 in 200, or 0.5%, of all the people living in the world. The Mongol troops did not respect women. During their raids, Mongolian soldiers stabbed pregnant women and removed their fetuses. In 1220, the Mongols sacked the city of Termez in modern-day Uzbekistan. There they came across a local woman. She pleaded with them to spare her life before swallowing her own pearls and committing suicide, but her captors had other plans, slicing open her abdomen and retrieving the pearls. The Mongols then believed that other locals would be doing the same, so they sliced all the women open one by one. Surprisingly, the Mongols allowed their own women to inherit property, to participate in religious ceremonies, and to be shamans and mediums, so in general, no, they didn't treat women so good. Using enemies as human shields is a great military tactic, a great way to get rid of prisoners who are getting too troublesome and expects them to hold. Genghis Khan was selective about which prisoners to use as shields. He allowed some enemy soldiers to join his army. He executed others who surrendered and expected good treatment. But when he was in a bad mood, he would force them to fight for him at the front lines. If they underperformed, they were put to the sword. The only way to survive was to fight like a tiger. No men, women, children, or even animals were spared, except the chosen ones, those that were permitted to witness the horror just so they could spread the fear. This was so effective that cities surrendered as soon as the Mongols approached. Khan had brutal warriors that left only destruction in their blood-soaked wake. Being merciful is not one of the Khan's strongest traits. In fact, it is a trait that he never seemed to even have. He wasn't one to forgive enemies. Instead, he brutally murdered them. His enemies weren't always from other countries. In fact, there were other Mongols rivaling Khan's position. His blood brother, Jamuka, was nearly as evil as he was. It seems that only the fittest, most terrifying Mongols survived, and even then only for a short while. Jamuka boiled his enemies in bubbling cauldrons. This tale spread fear across the world, but he lost the Battle of the 13 Sides to his blood brother, got betrayed by his own men, and chose to die rather than to fight by his side. But Genghis Khan sadly fell in love with the idea of boiling enemies and carried on doing it. There was nothing he enjoyed more than a good boiling. The strongest eyewitnesses passed out in the presence of this horrific punishment. The screams were said to haunt them forever. Guess their stews would never taste the same again. Coming into power isn't an easy task. The Khan was a strategist who knew exactly how to hurt the enemy the hardest way possible. Genghis Khan interacted with people from different religions, including Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and Taoism. He even sought advice from them. But that doesn't mean Khan tolerated other beliefs. He was quite intolerant of religion. Khan especially despised Jewish and Muslim people. He openly called them slaves and prohibited their religious rituals and customs. He made it a rule that the Jewish and Muslim people could only eat Mongolian food. Hopefully that didn't include rats, dogs, marmots, hamsters, soldiers, and the fresh corpses of their enemies. Muslims and Jewish people were even forbidden to practice circumcision. Some might have breathed a sigh of relief at that thought. Genghis Khan just didn't have the patience to coexist with other religions and cultures. His empire is based on cruelty and fear rather than religious and cultural tolerance. The sacking of Urgench is one of the most brutal massacres ever. Genghis Khan must have been very proud of this conquest. This battle dragged on for longer than 6 months. It was hard for the Mongols to penetrate the city and loot and plunder as they usually did, because the inside of the city had been fortified so the enemy could use guerrilla warfare. The Mongols then came up with the best possible way of getting the enemy out of their houses. They burned down the entire city. Few soldiers survived the fires, but those who did defended to their last breath. They knew that they would be murdered, so they fought hard until the very end. Once the fire had burned out, the Mongols diverted a dam in order to drown any survivors. The Mongols killed about 800,000 residents of Baghdad. 1.3 million died in Merv. Khan ordered each of his soldiers to kill at least 300 people in Merv. He himself sat on a golden throne and watched as men were dragged before him and executed on this memorable day for shrieking and weeping and wailing. In 1221, a soldier in Nishapur killed Conqueror, the husband of one of Genghis Khan's hundreds of daughters. Khan retaliated by massacring the entire population of 1.75 million. Survivors were, like every other resident of Nishapur, beheaded after being pulled from underground hiding places, mounds of rubble, and piles of bodies. The Mongols made 3 mountains of skulls from those that they beheaded at Nishapur, 1 pyramid each for men, women, and children. This is how a chronicler describes the scene. The Mongols now descended from the walls and began to slay and plunder. They then drove all the survivors, men and women, out onto the plain, and it was commanded that the town should be laid waste in such a manner that the site could be ploughed upon and that not even cats and dogs should be left alive. The Mongols preferred not to torture their prisoners. They enjoyed a quick killing, but prisoners were tortured on some occasions. Backs and necks were broken. Suffocating is longer and more painful than a beheading, or so we're told. Enemy rulers suffered a darker fate. These included being choked to death or being trampled by horses. Quick death, anyone? In August 1227, Genghis Khan died from the bubonic plague. He left careful instructions about his funeral procession and place of burial. About 2,000 slaves were assigned to the funeral and burial, but they were massacred by their guards as soon as they finished the job. These guards, in turn, were killed by their guards. The surviving guards murdered anyone they met on the way and committed suicide after returning to base. Why, you might wonder? Genghis Khan wanted his place of burial to remain a secret. Till today, his burial place is unknown and not soon to be found. Experts believe that he is likely buried in Burkhan Khaldun, the sacred mountain in the north of Mongolia. Clearly, power and greed went to his head. Even after his death, Genghis Khan did unspeakable things.